Okay.
Welcome on it's April the 28th or 29th, Sir Martin.
It is. It is
Okay. Okay.
indeed. With the
Okay.
28th, get the yeah. Well, it's my sister's birthday.
All right, Sunday the 28th in the year of our Lord 2024, and we're here like old pals getting together again with our guest Guido Preparata. And it's one of those podcasts where, like last week, or Michael with James Tunney, I think I just hit record before any of us said anything. Guido, how's life? What's going on in Italy?
Life is okay. Thank you for asking. What's new? Nothing much. No, there are no news. It's been fairly quiet and still working on various projects, and it's been yeah, working on the house. Been doing a little music. That's about it. How about you?
Well, but let me ask you one thing. But do you think you're trending? It's a way to frame it. I hadn't thought of a question. You've released, and we'll talk about them. You've released several books recently. All of them are pretty short. Um, I've read all of them. I encourage everybody to read them. But I told you, Guido, in some correspondence that I came across your name particularly on this neo-feudal Substack guy. And
Oh yeah.
he quotes you all the time. He's always mentioning you, and then just going one time, I think I was looking up an old article of yours, and I saw you were on another podcast or two, at least one of whom mentioned this podcast and kind of figuring out who you were. I do get correspondence about you sometimes, but do you how are your books selling, or like have you in the last 6 months or something, have you heard from different people or seen anything?
Sales have been average. I think I've sold about 500 copies or so of my books altogether,
Okay.
and
Good.
another 500 in Italy of the Hitler book alone. Potential is great. I haven't gotten my marketing act together quite out there, so
Uh-huh.
hopefully I can do better in the
Okay.
coming months.
Yeah. And you've been on several other podcasts?
Yes, yes. I've been yeah, on a bunch of other podcasts and Macduff and Peter Duke, John Coleman, and I forget what
What seems to
all.
be the main subject the other podcasters are interested in?
It's always Hitler is always the
Really?
yeah. They really Hitler is the main thing. People can never get enough of Hitler, and yeah, they love Hitler, and I was a bunch of the friendly people who were reading Hitler also. Some of them read my 9/11 book, and I got responses. I'm fairly proud of my 9/11 book, I must say.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And but some of these other friends told me, yeah, it's okay. It's not as good as Hitler, and and
Uh-huh.
it's okay. It's fair. I take offense because it's like it's like you tell me my baby is ugly, you know.
It's
It's
not
like
it's not a simple story for you. It's not a simple story, and it doesn't lead to
yeah,
I don't know, but it's
it's like, my baby, he's cute. No, I mean it's no, I don't think he's ugly at all. And but whatever. I mean yeah, well, things like that. And also I think that my book on Christ is important in a way, I think.
oh, it is. It is. I just
And
revisited that in the essay form in
yeah,
New
and that's
Directions.
yeah, and it's attracting no interest. I mean, people they just want Hitler. I mean, I said, well, what is this guy? Because I said, well, you like the Hitler book. Well, what has this person written? Oh, there's this book on Jesus. Meh. No, I like Hitler, but no, it should be. I think, so like the politics of Jesus very important, and so on, and faith and things like that, and creed and credence. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm not, I don't have a vision for marketing and promoting myself and making my stuff visible. I think I have to find how to do that, and maybe that book can reach more people and make a more fruitful and interesting debate, I think.
Michael, you say something, but I want to say I do want to circle back to the political scripting of Jesus too, sometime in the conversation. But Michael, when Guido was talking about publishing and everything like that, your face was showing some
Well,
energy
yeah, I
there.
know. I mean, it's the hardest part is the marketing. How do you get it out there, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know about this is probably true for Guido, but for me, when the Submerged Reality came out, which was 9 years ago, time
How
that
we
you know,
met. That's how we met.
but that was easy to promote that book through social media because that was before the algorithms arose
Huh.
that could squash engagement. So just by using Facebook, for instance, 9 years ago, I put a couple posts about the book out and it blew up. I think it sold 3,000 copies or something. But the last few books hasn't done that because I am actually I'm convinced that the government's hacked my phone. But because of my outspokenness, shall we say, about various medical interventions over the last 4 years and how my wife got cancer from it.
But how do you think people are picking up on that part of you through the podcast or where just
No. I
the
think
Facebook piece, the same people who saw you on Facebook
I think
that you started getting throttled?
the usual suspects, the FBI and
Gotcha.
the CIA,
Yeah.
the same people who squash engagement. As we know for a fact, we're doing it because of the Twitter files through Twitter, and they were doing it through Twitter, so they're doing it through all the other ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's of course Google's doing it too. So, and I think with important topics like those Guido writes about, which take on the superstructure, that's part. I think that's part of the reality right now. So it's finding an alternative underground because you used to be able to do it underground when my books came out, my earlier books, but now you have to have the underground of the underground. And I think to a degree these podcasts are like that. But if you, as you know, Mike, right? Since we had
Oh, yeah.
Larry a couple of months ago, our engagement has kind of right, and that's not because of people aren't looking for us, because YouTube has squelched our reach. Just how it is, right? The archons.
By squelch or reach, you mean it has put your podcast at the bottom of their
It makes it harder to
algorithmic?
find. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of tools. I've never looked into it, but I think, yeah, just fewer, the shows up on fewer
But
searches.
it was immediate when we had Larry on and he dropped that bomb about the whats.
Yeah.
We got they pulled that one.
To their credit, he also
up.
admitted he overspoke on something as true that was conjectural. He didn't, nor should he. He didn't apologize, but he said, yeah, I know.
What are you referring to? Larry who?
Chap, a theologian, just his opinions on, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, what do you think, Guido?
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Yeah, I have no doubts about the algorithm and the tipping points and all that.
Yeah.
I don't buy it for a second that, like the story said, well, these guys put up this video and they were just like, throwing rotten eggs at each other and it went viral. Like 5 billion people watched it and everybody started throwing eggs at it. Yeah, I don't buy that for a moment. Somebody put it out there and made it go viral. The question is, how does it go viral? They know how to. There's no question about it. Yeah.
That's interesting. I've never heard anybody say it like that. That's simple. Like,
they do.
Yeah. Even promoting something as innocuous as that. Yes. Go ahead.
Here's my theory. Okay, go. Here's my theory, guys. Tell me what you think of this. So this maybe it had to be, was while Mary Grove was still around. So Mary Grove's been closed 7 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the last year of that, I remember the ice bucket challenge.
I do.
Yeah.
And then the Tide Pod challenge, which
I do remember it. I didn't do
it. Take a bite of a Tide Pod, which is laundry detergent, concentrated. And I am convinced that there were people, and this is how it works, but there were people from the government, from the various agencies, who looked at that and said, "Look, social media can make people do this stupid shit. So we can use this And that's when I think right after that is when the propaganda machine really cranked up on social media. And that was right before the Trump election, right? And I think that's what I think that, because if you remember, those agencies weren't paying attention to social media at all until Ron Paul raised like $6 million in one day.
I did not know all
Social
this.
media.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Oh,
Start in, Guido.
No, it's fascinating. No, I believe it. It makes complete sense. We've always been wondering what goes viral, what doesn't go viral, and
I've always seen the negative, that they could throttle something. I've never seen like juicing something truly innocuous is what you guys were talking about.
oh
But yeah,
yeah, no, I believe that, and I also and yeah, well, I
that was
have
a conspiracy theory too. My son's trying to set the house on fire.
so that's bad. Yeah.
It was
I
burning a
pronounce on
grilled
that.
cheese
It's
sandwich.
bad behavior. Tell him. Yeah.
He works for the CIA.
Yeah. Guido, you were responding?
No, I was the about YouTube. Yeah, another aspect of this is YouTube starting censoring people, right? Left and right. And a lot of people complained. And I'm thinking, you can't complain. That's their platform. And and they are free to do whatever they want to do. So, and if you're not okay with it, form your own platform and defy them. And see if you know this the mentality I think we should have.
Agreed. I was having
Yeah.
lunch with somebody this week and they were talking about kind of trying to live outside of something. And then
Hmm.
I found that I got animated saying like there's almost nowhere you can go, you know, to be outside, and that it's so tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's they you know, I'm an actor and I want to have and I want to act in all
Yeah.
the theaters around and so you can't perform. Build your own theater. This is what
Right.
it's come to. Now, a lot of these people, actors are wanting representation, their whole issue of race, we hate the man, we don't want, oh, great. And then build your own studio and
Yeah.
make your own movies. No,
And there's evidence. Well,
I want to be part of his show. And then you're part of,
but
and then shut up. Once you're part of that show, you're bought, you know?
now I think there's
That was
there's
really
a lot of
good.
truth in that. I mean, it's all absolutely true. And you can see, so when I was 18 years old, I signed this really crappy record deal and recorded a really crappy record. But that record, actually, what happened, it was like a local label, and Polygram, I think, wanted to sign us and re-record it, which our manager didn't want to do, which was probably a bad thing at the time, but good thing in hindsight. But back in those days, you couldn't do anything independently, really.
Mhm.
You needed the big guys, right?
Yeah.
That's how the world was at that time. And it cost $1 million. I mean, so much money. I think, so this is 1981. I think it cost us $25,000 to record this album.
Yeah, a
Where
mint.
if you did it now, it would
Mhm.
cost you a couple thousand.
Yeah,
And then if you hired other musicians, maybe up to 5.
right.
Say more about that. Why so much cheaper?
Because
Yeah,
because it's direct to consumer, right?
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
Um, I mean, unless you're Taylor Swift, but
yeah,
most
right.
independent people like Olivia Cheney, who we
Yeah,
interviewed,
I missed the obvious.
they
Right,
kind of go
right.
direct. They cut out the record companies and the executive, and the same thing with my publisher Angelico, but and with Guido's publishing venture, you don't have to beg to Random House or whomever.
Yeah,
You can go direct to the consumer, which is you might
it,
not
it's
sell as
hard.
many,
Yeah,
but
it's
you
hard.
have immediate access,
Yeah,
and that's building another platform, right?
it is. It is. One has to figure out how to do it because it's hard. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
And your main foray, Guido, into that world, at least thinking, is presumably perishable currency. I mean, that's kind of the larger context in which to put that idea for some of our listeners who've heard you
Well,
before.
everything everything we discuss, everything we want to do, every change we want to implement is not going to happen on this stage because it's owned, as we just said. It will never happen. It's like we're involved, and you met some of the guys when you were over in Italy, and it's a bigger group,
That was a
and
wild trip, a wild trip.
yeah, and oftentimes, it's like we have this project, and sometimes the question pops up and says, well, there are funds from the EU. It's like here you are,
Right, right,
trying
right.
to
Yep.
and funds from the EU, and it's like you always go to the master. So perishable money, it's the most radical, as we said, most radical economic revolutionary concept. It is that, of course, not by itself within a wider architecture of redesigning society. It is unthinkable that we could possibly do them in the system we are now. We live in a cage. We call it whatever you want, a cage, a cavern, a beehive, or more an ant heap, and so on. And they will not let you do it here because it's proprietary, and because it's against their interest to make that happen. So we have to think the only thing we can do, as it's people tell me, okay, well, as people have read my books, is, well, you criticize, but what are we going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do concretely? And I'm thinking, well, and I always say I can suggest a few things, but everybody has to think, what are you going to do? What I think that what has to happen is that we're going to have to think in this mentality that we're going to have to build our own theater and start the play. There's no other way. So we have to create a space. How to create the space remains to be seen. And we have to create lifelines to make that happen, that are separated and separate from those of the system. And mostly, the ways in which they suck resources and lifeblood out of us is through taxation and the credit system. So that means that we're going to have to find ways of avoiding ways to be taxed. So there's already an element of rebellion there and of open criminal defiance of the system. I'm afraid to say, but that's how it is. And
I'm in.
two, yeah, no, I know you are, but most people, and I was saying, we talked about this even with Mike and the Steiner people and all sorts of, there's thousands, a galaxy of dissidents, and everybody is great at making plans, but everybody is not willing to get his ass whipped in any form. And so,
Mhm.
well, then because they're scared. Well,
Yep.
we are scared. Well, okay, but there's no other way around it. And once you create this space, have possibility of creating your own bank. That too is an act of defiance. They're going to accuse you of forging the currency. It has already happened. And I'm not only talking about the Gazelle experiment. There was a recent case in Italy too, where things like that, what was about 20 years ago. All right. So, and they send the police. So, and the states are very strong, extremely strong. So it's an act of rebellion you're about to undertake. So this is what I tell people. So I see no other way. Certainly
Right.
not by internal campaigning or voting for independent candidates or, well, we've gone through all that. America has a history of that. Every country has.
Mhm.
So every country does. So yeah.
Let me ask you this. Actually, I've been thinking about this recently. Um, as far as the financial system goes, it seems, when they keep, it's funny money, it's monopoly money. Is it about to implode? The way I've been thinking about it for a few years is, they're kind of floating these these bad checks, and eventually it's going to collapse. Do you think that's a possibility?
Everybody says this. We've been hearing about collapses for now, at least. I'm thinking of the early LaRouche pamphlets that were circulating on campuses about 30 years ago,
Hmm.
but nothing has happened. And I don't think everything has happened. An interesting thing, something, if it happens, it will be by design, as always.
Yeah.
There's a guy who's gone viral by the name
Oh.
of Webb. I'm sure you've heard of him. Former hedge fund manager who's been Roger, forget his first name, double last name, Rogers, Webb, something like that.
Huh, I don't know.
Yeah, and who's a former an American who now lives in Sweden, and a former hedge fund manager who's been promoting his book for free called The Great Taking, and offering, and in videos accompanying it, and offering an alternative explanation of the Great Depression, which is in fact extraordinary. The history of in the history of the teaching of economics, even for American students, that there is not a conventional single explanation of why America's system of manufacturing and economic system was the most advanced in the world, was paralyzed for a decade and was not jump-started until they were going to rearm and participate in a war. And that whole decade of FDR was strange, bank holidays and strange rearrangements of the gold ratio with the dollar, and then relaunching and then stopping, and nothing seemed to work. And it looks like a big mess, and it's extremely suspicious. Webb argues that it took them a decade to organize a system. He makes mostly a legal point. They created what he was called a system of phantom property through the financial assets. So much so that when a crisis erupts, you were made to believe by your broker that you are the legal owner of whatever security, but you're not. You're only holding a piece of paper, like a little thing related to it, but you're really not. It is actually they designed such that all these securities in fact belong in a pool within a clearing union that's under the control of the banking system. And in this way, they were able to redistribute and wealth in such a way, and to pauperize America, and restructure in such a way that the new asset configuration of America emerged. And then, of course, they were ready to relaunch credit and the war and so on and so forth. Webb argues that they are doing the same thing now. So we have to prepare for Armageddon or something, but it's going to come. And the medicine they will sell after we will have panicked, those of us who have some things invested in this system, as Mike was saying, or even Michael right now with the funny paper, well, whatever it is, whatever savings you may have invested, even by the most trustworthy of brokers, according to Webb, is going to go up in smoke. And that will be the opportunity to introduce this digital currency, the digital Franklin, which they've been talked about now for the past, since the 2008 crisis. I think that there is something likely in this. Maybe not a catastrophe scenario, but if they introduce the digital money, which is pretty much, it's not just like now.
That seems like a goal. I don't know how people could deny that, but go ahead.
Well,
but like the way we get there, this is super interesting.
I'm wrapping it up. Well, with the digital currency, it's like every single cent is stamped. And at that point, it's not like now it's magnetic impulses floating on the network as it has been for a while. Now, this is the next step. If every single stamp has a barcode, every single cent has a barcode, then they see everything. And so you can no longer avoid taxes. A lot of stuff in Italy, but in the States too, is done under the table to avoid value-added tax, and that kind of thing. That you can no longer do. In Italy, is a necessity. Yeah, I say, well, a lot of these professionals, they ride the system and they defraud the fisc and the IRS. Well, I get it, but sure, but we save too by going in the, under the table, because with a taxation rate at 40+%, I mean, what are you going to do? So not to pay value-added tax, you're going to have that. And it also is going to resolve all of those problems that were critical, and also in connection with the way in which America manages empire financially. And that's too is connected to what happened with 9/11, as I argue in my books. The fact that they had lost track of a lot of dollar bills, the big cut ones with which the drugs are actually circulated, that had been vacuumed somewhere in Central Asia. So what I argue in 9/11 is that they had to set in motion. It achieved a variety of ends, the operation. But all that 20-year-long war in Afghanistan was what they call the insurgency, was pretty much an a kind of a tide ebb and flow movement of American troops into poppy opium producing territory to harvest the drugs and to resell it in Europe through the mafias in order to suck back those dollars that the central banks of the Bank of England were so clamoring and desperately clamoring to have back. And I say this, going back to the thesis of Phantasmagoria, the book on 9/11, because I remember the head of the United Nations, of the crime department of the United Nations, in when was that? In 2009 or something, said if it hadn't been for drug money, the Western banking system would not have been afloat. And so at that point, you connected the dots. So now, if everything goes digital, all these games are finished. Pretty much as we were arguing when we discussed this, pretty much as Afghanistan, you'll no longer hear about Afghanistan anymore, because now you have fentanyl and you don't need opium because you can get that same high for a fraction of the cost. And that was the only reason why they were there, to get that market back and resell the drugs. So if these scenarios come true, then we are really screwed. I mean, I don't want to. I hope it's more complicated for them than it seems, but they are so far ahead in this game that I don't know. We're just going to be spectators of one horror after another one. I hope not.
It was heavy. We don't usually have these pauses, but the tell people, and I think these will connect again because they had heard me say it before. You just did a great job, and it wasn't about that, but people who are interested in what you said, the book Phantasmagoria is out there, but give people a sense for what you're doing in the political scripting of Jesus, because like for the neo-feudal guy and so many young people very interested in Ernst Jungher, and in this short book, he plays a significant role, as does the history of American relations with Nazi Germany and the Vatican and so forth. Tell people kind of the thesis of that book, the political scripting of genius, and this will come full circle, I'm convinced.
Yeah, Ernst Jünger is, I think he's mentioned in the Empire and Church. Well, I guess once we had this discussion, Mike, I was wondering, what is a Catholic, right? And I don't know. And a Catholic is a Christian who owes allegiance to Rome, basically. Now, having seen what Rome is, not that people need it, but I had to see it to have, and I had to see. And what I saw was just it just makes you want to cry. Then I said, okay, well,
get into the weeds here. Get into the weeds a little bit with that, not just to pull out salacious details, but break down a little bit. What you saw made you want to cry? The careermanship, the duplicity, the lack of talent.
Yeah, all of it. There's the fact that it's well, now it's become an agency of the U.S., by the way, and everybody knows this, and it's been confirmed to me at very high levels. It's just it's another box they bought. It's like Fiat buying.
And what's the main threat? What's the main threat in that relationship that the U.S. would use against the Vatican? Like, you're our toady, and if you don't do as we say on issue A, B, or C, this is what we do. How does that work for the listener? Yeah.
Well, no, it's like Chrysler buying Fiat. It's theirs now. So, well, why? Why did they want it? Well, when they were when the U.S. and the Brits were raising the world to the ground, Italy was scheduled. If they hadn't surrendered in 43 in September, Eisenhower told Italy's first general that they had already drawn up plans to bomb it to nothingness, and they'd done it scientifically, American style, with great organizational sense, with quadrants where everything was going to disappear. I mean, they killed 75,000, at least 70,000 people with just surgical things when at the time where they weren't certain what the Italians were going to do with Mussolini or not. But the funny story of Eisenhower, he told this, it was in Malta, and he told this general that they were going to destroy the country except for the Vatican. The reason being because the Vatican commanded the allegiance of a lot of people. So this is how forward-looking imperial powers are. It's the one thing they didn't give a damn about Italy itself. It's all the it's the prestige, it's the creed that was given by the faithful to this center of charisma, which they really wanted. And so, and in the end, they just laid siege to the citadel of the priests because they wanted what then eventually amounted to 1 billion souls, right? Which were they were not under their direct jurisdiction, which was, as I wrote, intolerable. Everybody has to believe in them. And so in the end, by to this story, I mean, the siege, the story goes, from what I heard, it began with John Paul, who was kind of already halfway there. Ratzinger was kind of wishy-washy, trying to resist, not really, gave up, couldn't sustain the kind of compromise idea they had in mind, and then and Bergoglio's been waiting on the sidelines for a while. And with him, the passage was consummated, the takeover was consummated. So now I went to Rome, and I saw this pretty much. A company, a foreign-owned company, which was basically doing politics on behalf of. The people there were very, very low quality. Intellectual level was crap. There was not a corpus of intellectual worthy of the name. Everything was, the cultural, anthropological dominance of the United States was crushing. And the recruitment, it was just recruiting from poor countries, because nobody now, as we know, the vocations are zero. Nobody wants to be part of that. Nobody wants to be a priest. And priest for what? In the name of what? It's not clear. So the only ones that do this are those who get three meals a day, and those desperados for super poor countries, Africa and Latin America mostly. And so that's who our new shepherds are. Now, some of them are cool, and I like the Mexicans enough. They were the most articulate and interesting of people, but I don't know, for the rest, it was just dismaying. The level of these shepherds was subpar, and the whites, the European ones, were just a bunch of just crass, envious power brokers who believed in absolutely nothing other than having their personal little orchards within their sphere of power to cultivate whatever little crap project they had, or little publications, this and that and the other, and repeating mechanically whatever was issuing from the pyramid of this opaque organization. So it was just it was nothing. It was an apotheosis of nothing.
And there was no meaningful dissent.
No, you don't dissent. If you try to dissent there, they throw you out, which is what happened to me.
It's like academia, right?
Yeah, it was exactly the same thing. And so whatever I suggested to them, reforms I suggested, and of course I went and talked about this money thing to them. Mm-hmm. There are some very bright monsignori and high prelates over there, but even those who understood and sympathized, just to say, they shook their heads and said, this is a royal court. They told me, just try other things, or go talk to this other person. In the end, nothing came of it. So I said to myself, all right, so we are Christians who owe allegiance to Rome. If this is Rome, I hold no allegiance to Rome whatsoever. And so then the question is I'm a Christian then. And what is a Christian? What is a Christian? And so then I pushed this, and I tried to push this the furthest I could, because in the end, we realized also that in the dynamics of power, as good rulers know, to rule with the bludgeon alone is extremely expensive. It's very inefficient, and it gets you a lot of animosity. It's much better to keep you under hypnosis. And so then we go to the critique of religion. And so a lot has been written by the critique of religion. And, Freud has written very famous pages of that, that in order to, but not from the viewpoint of power, to a psychological viewpoint. So those of us who just cannot put up with society, who have not been fit and tenacious enough to make it into society, and are misfits, have to come to terms with reality. And one way to do this is to distort it so much through religion that we make ourselves still submissive, but in a form, through a form of submission that is agreeable to our temper, to a God which we call at the same time a guardian angel, and that makes it better for us. And so I said to myself, and then all these critiques of religion that we've all read about, because power is always accompanied by the church. The Tsar had the Orthodox Church, the Emperor had the Pope, and the Protestants had all sorts of preachers, same thing. And the potentates in the Far East had the Buddhists. It's always the same thing. They're there as this ancillary movement preaching love and compassion and mitigation of pain. But in the end, it's only there to make sure, to clean up the mess that is generated by a system that is unconditional and everywhere across the board, commanded by parasitical elements who are absolutely ruthless and keep the hierarchy going the way it does. So I said to myself, I owe no allegiance to Rome. What if I were devoid of religion too? What if the story they told us about God and all that, what if that were a farce as well? And I started sharing some of these qualms of mine with friends. Some of them send me back books of prayer and things like this, like, the ideas, the guy's lost it. I'll pray for you. And it's sweet, and I'm happy they do, and I hope the prayers will work. But I'm asking myself, and I keep thinking, it's not that I've lost faith, or I haven't. Nothing's changed. I'm just trying to push the argument to its extreme conclusions. What if there weren't a religion? So I was reading Simone Weil the other day, right? And she says, so she converted to Christianity, and she says, Jesus is the tenure of Christendom is an abdication, because Satan says to Christ, that famous passage, which I cite in my book about, in the little story I published in Michael's publication about the Grimm brothers.
Yeah.
The passage is famous, and Elul made me think about it, but I should have known. He says, well, the devil says to Jesus, "Did you want this on the kingdoms and the power, the glory? You can have it. Just submit." And Jesus says, "No thanks." But Elul says, mind you, Jesus doesn't question the prerogative of Satan. He just says, "No thanks." In other words, he acknowledges that this is Satan's. So Simone Weil describes this as an abdication. So God abdicates once. He just leaves. He leaves the stage. He's not here. We're under somebody else's jurisdiction, and it's an asshole. It's Satan's. It's not God's. But he says, Simone Weil says, he doesn't abdicate only once. He abdicates twice. When he goes to the cross and kills himself, it's a suicidal God. Let's not forget that. There's a God with suicidal tendencies. That's pretty scary, right? And I'm thinking, so I pledge allegiance. I don't pledge allegiance to Rome, but I'm left with the story of the cross, with a God that has abdicated twice. I mean, I'm in a pretty dire condition here. I mean, and so I want to make this the beginning of a way of thinking about this. And as I keep saying, and as we've been talking amongst ourselves for a while, and as I've told, and Mike knows this, I said, so long as you offer no convincing discussion of the problem of theodicy, how can there be so much pain in a world designed by a good God? The problem of religion is not even solved. It's not even begun. It's not even broached. And until it's broached, I don't want to listen. And I have the sensation that it's not broached. Possibly. And I'm afraid, and I have to say this to my fellow Christians or whatever, and even Buddhists, it hasn't been broached, no matter how powerful the story of the crucifixion may be. And now, and I'm going to conclude this long tirade with this. I read, watch for the 100th time what I think is the most beautiful movie made, and I think it's out of a book, which is The Burmese Harp, right?
The movie's
And
called Watch, Guido?
The Burmese Harp
The
movie.
Burmese Harp is the movie. Okay.
Yeah, and there's a book too. I don't know if it's the book predates the movie, possibly. I don't know. I'm ignorant like that. I don't know, but the movie is phenomenal, and it broaches that. It broaches in a way with such an originality and a depth that I found nowhere else. The movie overwhelms me every time. I cannot
Never
speak at
heard
the
of it.
end. It's extraordinary, and a lot of things I do not understand of that movie, but it's deep. It's as deep as I've experienced. And a movie, I saw a remake of the movie because it's 1956, and they did a remake of that. It's about the final stages of the war of this Japanese company of soldiers that's fighting in Burma against the Brits, and the fate of one of them in the midst of the carnage. And and yeah, and I saw when I was a teenager, and it has stayed with me ever since. So there is a beginning of the discussion of theodicy in a movie like that, and I'm sure in also other things. But I think that the dialogue of religion and all these theologians, I don't know what they're talking about, nor do I know what Christians tell us that Jesus has died for our sins. And I don't even know. No, I've never understood what that means, and I've never heard any one of them explain what that is. And even all these explanations of Christianity having changed the spiritual landscape ever since its beginning in a major sense, you know, the radius of the world changed. I don't see that either. The carnage has only intensified ever since, as we all know. I'm not saying anything original now. So I would I would start here. What if we were, and I think what really sows the seeds of doubt in the political scripting of Jesus is the book by Robert Graves. But Robert Graves, of course, he didn't believe that in the least, that story. And he belonged to a completely different camp. He was actually attracted to all sorts of other types of cults. But aside from what Graves, brilliant writer anyway, believed, um, I said, okay, we no longer have Rome. Forget Rome. To hell with Rome. But what if we didn't have what if we didn't have the Gospels either? Then what? What would we do? What if we had irrefutable evidence that those Gospels were fabrication? After all, they were recommended as state religion by an emperor. It's as if I said Nixon recommended that the story of some kind of a voodoo healer from Haiti became national religion. Who would buy into that? And yet, that's exactly what we have. What if we didn't have any of this? What would we have? From where would we start? So.
Well, that's what I've been thinking. I think about that exact. I've been having these conversations with my wife about this almost daily, and even um, thinking about translations of the Bible, and the kind of hocus pocus that we've had, that Protestant really picked up, but everybody picks it up, right? It comes from Judaism, right, where the Torah has never been edited. It came just like this, and we know that it's been edited, and we know that it's been changed, and so and like you said, Guido, well, so what is it? I don't even know what it is. And the thing is, even nevertheless, and I think this is what you're saying inside of there someplace, Guido, is you still have a sense for something, but it's not the institution. And it's not, and I think that what's interesting, the institution of the Catholic Church, for instance, there's a direct parallel with the institution of higher education, where you have the seminarians, yeah, and then you have the deacons or assistant professors, then you have the priests or the associate professors, and the bishops or the full professors. But it's a system of control. Both sides are systems of control, right? And those who go along get along. as we know. And those who don't want to play ball, don't they have to build their own theater. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's how it is.
But nevertheless, and I've been asking this. We've had shows about this, Mike. Whether or not Christianity or Catholicism, where you want to put it, is discoverable organically, because we're oppressed with tradition and authority. And if it can't be discovered organically, then it probably doesn't exist, other than as
I
a
want to
mirage.
say, yeah. I want to maybe add
but I
something.
think it does
Yeah.
exist, right?
It would be, and maybe Guido could respond to both of these, would be, Guido, when you're talking about the current regime, you can't get out of the spotlight, that, and you're just going to say the church is fully within that world. The yearnings, and this isn't an answer to any of that, but I'm wondering for you, as you're thinking about what Michael said, is, these yearnings for, I should say that for me, the idea of canonicity has a lot to do with this. And you had said in these past couple of weeks, you've been reading about Marcionism. We'll come to that. But
I'm sorry, the idea of what?
Canonicity. That, like, when we look at the early church, we just had, there were various scriptures. Enoch was definitely scripture for the early Christians. A lot of things like that. Then I just happened upon this lecture about a guy who was saying Marcion de facto almost backed the church into the idea of a canon. We just kind of solidified it. But if there was a period in the early church, with this uber Steiner Barfieldian theme of original participation, alienation, and participation at a higher level, final participation, could the church need something of an opening? So my understanding of even official Catholic theology is that nobody has ever declared that the canon's officially closed. And that if we're moving into a time where that question starts to get open, I wonder if poetically that could lead us to a little bit of a worldview outside this prison with walls we can't see that you're saying we're all caught up in. The financial system, everything you've been describing. Does any of that make any sense?
Could you? So, what are you trying to?
Oh, it's just
to contemplate here.
We're talking about the institutional church. We're talking about its death in this iteration for sure, I would say. And I think some of us, when we see something going through decomposition, we're looking at the same time for the lineaments of what's being born. And I guess, I don't know if we disagree on this or whether we agree. I'm not like super hopeful, or do I disagree with you on any of the facts of kind of the bleak picture you're describing? Unless people are willing to do something, I would say 2,000 years after the incarnation, much more of it is on us. It's not us making the sign of the cross. Much more of it is on us. But we're either going to get that message that it's on us, or we're going to die trying. And that the lineaments of what's trying to be born, I would say, and probably many listeners to this podcast, probably part of Michael, I think part of you, Guido, is to be on the side of this thing being born. I don't think we're totally alone. I would say the divine feminine might be the best image we have, Sophia, for this thing, kind of the shape for our times is being born.
No, as I said, nothing's changed. It's not that I like this idea. We have to build a theater, and it doesn't really it doesn't
definitely
really
have
matter.
to build a theater. Yep.
It doesn't really matter in the end, because even like Jesus, everybody has a Jesus. There's like 1,000 Jesus. Everybody wants a Jesus. Tolstoy has a Jesus. The Nazis have a Jesus. Everybody has one. Cosmic being here. The Theophanists have their Jesus, and so on. And then there are tons who have no Jesus at all. It doesn't really matter in the end. Although I don't know. Because Steiner, for instance, and I said this, we talked about this. He at a certain point, I remember he says, "Look, if you don't get this Jesus thing, just forget it."
Yeah,
Forget
right. I
it.
was going to ask you directly about that.
yeah, it's just it's like you're not getting it. It's like you want to be a musician, and you want to, it's like you want to be a violinist, and it's like want to be a violinist without a violin. He puts it that way.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, well, what about all those people who are not Christians? It sounds, and I'm sure I'm sure Stein wasn't thinking like a chief inquisitor in that sense, but it doesn't matter. I think it's a time where it's a time of this is an opportunity, and I agree with you, Mike. This is an opportunity. It's exciting on the one hand. I'm very much in a torch it type of mood. There's nothing, I was mentioning these books we have in our libraries, and hardly a book in here has been important to me, and it's because and then when I mentioned this in this, I was reading this book by Fromm, right, Eric Fromm.
Which one?
Um, Not one of his important one. It was a book
Okay.
on Zen Buddhism.
Cool.
And I mentioned about this. Yeah, the book is meh, there's nothing there aside from a citation where he says, again, we live in a world where like two people, a handful of people rule over a gazillion. So the literature, what we call science, reflects that. In other words, 99% of what you read is false. So if that is the case, doesn't that apply to scripture as well? Especially if they're so inclined on making you read that scripture. It's like,
See, I'm just saying, including in scripture those things like Rabelais, Cervantes, Shakespeare, maybe some of these
yes,
people. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That would be
Dante,
the fifth gospel idea.
yes, the
Yeah,
classics. Yeah,
yeah,
we talked about this. Yeah,
yeah,
years ago.
yeah.
Yeah, if the system is so rotten, and they give you and they certify you as an educated person at school by making you read always those three same people, there must be a reason. And the reason must be that those three people at the very least give you nothing, and at worst they actually turn your brain into mush. And so yeah, so maybe it's about time that we just set a lot of things on fire to start anew, like when you do, I guess, Michael, it's what you do in agriculture, right? Also sometimes you burn
Burn them down, yeah.
yeah. I think it's time to burn everything down and restart. And maybe something will sprout again from that, and something new will come. I don't know. But you have to ask yourself the question, right? If they're so keen on making you read these books, it's suspicious. But
Well,
it's a dangerous tack, because but
what
doubting
it is
doubting
though,
is good.
Mhm.
what it is, it's not just the texts themselves,
Hmm.
right? Whether it's Shakespeare or the Bible, it's the culture of interpretation that rises up around it, right?
Sure.
And that's the real problem.
Interesting.
You get it's the hermeneutic, right? And and what you see, I mean, with the Christianity in particular, all the different sects of Christianity, it's a competition of interpretations, right?
Yeah.
And this is what when I'm talking about, is it possible to discover Christianity organically? And I don't just mean just from scripture or anything either.
Hmm.
I also mean from nature, the two books, and maybe there are other books too. But the idea that um, can you short circuit or cut through, it's kind of a phenomenological approach. Can you cut through the cultures of interpretation? I mean, how we're, or put, how far can you cut through? To what degree? Because you're never going to be
It's a
totally
wild
outside of it.
question, Michael. Really wild. And again, the two books would be key. If this pattern is a return with a difference, even the Trappists would say we were given the book of scripture because we had lost the ability to read from the book of nature. So there was a degeneration
Mhm.
that whatever eon we're trying to bring in, I just had to jump in to say, yeah, the two books would be crucial, the book of nature and scripture. Guido.
Yeah, the problem is that the book of nature is a scary book. And if you, yeah, sure, you mean you can romanticize it, um and it's the notion of the great architect and the builder of this world, what they call the demiurge and all that, who is a genius scientist. There's no question about its existence. No question. We haven't created ourselves. I was looking the other day. I cracked a tooth, and it was they extracted it from my mouth with pliers and a
That's so much
screwdriver
pain. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and a
I just see. Oh
screwdriver.
God.
Yeah,
Yeah,
screwdriver. Wow.
a screwdriver, and then they extracted it, and I said, "Save it, save it." And so and the dental assistant looked at me going, "Oh," she looked at me scared. Yeah, sure. And then they handed me the tooth, and
That was just this week.
a month ago, and I
Oh,
glued it
okay.
back.
Wow.
I glued the tooth back together, and I looked at this tooth, and you know, and the tooth, and the tooth has been in a cave all its life, but now it's in the open. And I was looking at this weird fang, and I thought, I thought this really trivial thought. Somebody designed this. We have no problem. We know that there is a designer here, a monster, super fantastic designer. But that's not just it, and that's the person that, physicists speak to, thinking they're speaking to God. But then it's the one, as we said before, the one who builds the stage. He built matter and the stage. But what the problem is not, that's enormous. It's the Apollonian. Great. The problem is not so much the stage once built. It's the kind of it's the Holocaust that takes place on its altar daily. That's the question. That seems to be somebody else's idea. And so when we say everybody's a creature of God, and you remember when I was at the Vatican and I was showing these priests these videos of parasites, what certain parasites are capable of doing. There's a whole literature of this. I know very little of it. I mean, extraordinary what they do, these parasites. I mean, the intelligence, how they're capable of maneuvering the host into making them do it, extraordinary things. It is so, it is so profoundly wicked and clever at the same time that you wonder. I don't see, there's no Apollo here. And Steiner comes up and says, well, yeah, that's Ahriman. Okay, by borrowing from, Zoroastrian demonology. And I think that's great. Parasites and all these nasty creatures and tarantulas. And that's the realm of this particular subdevil. But it's all metaphorical language, right? It doesn't advance our knowledge in any way of what the main problem is. And so I always go back to this. When there's going to be the torching and the reconstruction, we have to start from this, or else it's going to be all over the same thing again. Even assuming that we're able to escape the the marriage of church and state, which is the only thing that we're acquainted with, because the catechism is solely designed to keep the peace within the cavern, which is under strict orders. It's not about being good at all. So
No. It's about crowd control.
Yeah, yeah,
It's the opiate
exactly.
of the people, right?
Crowd control. It's a good one. I'll write it down.
What are you thinking, Michael?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, because you can't help but think of Gnosticism, right? With the demiurge, and it's this. There's an element to the world. In fact, that's one of the gospel reading from today. There's an element of the world that is fabricated, right? And it's illusory. But there's this other element, you can call it the Sophianic or whatever it is, but the thing that shines through that same world upon occasion. And you see this in Jakob Burma and other people who, and I think Steiner too, that they were able to perceive the beyond that. And I think that, to me, I mean, that came to my awareness through phenomenology, is that there, and this is, I got this from Simone Weil, to go back to her, where the idea that at times something seems to penetrate from beyond that screen, or whatever you want to call it, that comes through, that shines through. And for Simone Weil, it was and this is how I bumped into it, because I was working on my dissertation on metaphysical poetry, and her story about when she received a book of the metaphysical poets from a priest in France, and she really loved George Herbert's poem Love 3, and she loved it so much she translated it into French. And whenever she felt a migraine coming on, she would repeat it to herself as a way to calm herself at first. And then she said, but after a while, it took on the virtue of a prayer. And then at one time during one of these recitations, she told the priest in the letter, Christ himself came and took possession of me. So and that's, I don't know how to, but I think people have that experience. You have those experiences, whether it's through the arts or liturgy or nature or whatever it happens to be, where something beyond the terrible weight penetrates through or shines through. I think shine, and the word von Balthasar uses is splendor, right? That shines through. But I think both are true. I think both are true. And so the question is, which is the real world, right? And in Gnosticism, it's the one that shines through that you're trying to return to, right? You realize that most of what you see, or almost all of what you see, is illusion and fabrication. And the task in Gnosticism, and that's what the knower is, right, is to find the way back to the real world.
That's your Hymn of the Pearl interest.
Yeah, Hymn of the Pearl is the same story.
Sure. And again, that could be canon, a larger notion of canon. Guido?
Yeah. Well, but the moment we are positing Gnosticism, and the fact Michael calls it the screen, I call it the veil, or I borrowed somewhere the veil and whatever it is. Already this is heretical. This is heretical material from the church's viewpoint. No, it's yeah. No, I know. It's but it's not what we were taught,
I know.
And even if great, so we refound the scripture with a Gnostic twist. But what about the abdication we were talking about before? And then it's like if you cannot entrust yourself to a parent that's not going to protect you, then what? You cannot, so its role as a janitor and as a parent is not fulfilled. And so what are we refounding a creed of orphans? And we're forlorn. I mean, we just keep hoping. And those of us who can sustain it within this Gnostic twist are only going to be people with a stoic turn of.
Or could it be? Is the model? And I think it was. I'm not using him as an expert on ancient history, but Belloc, describing the growth of the early church. Again, I'm keeping to this theme of a return with a difference. But he would describe the early church as like cells, right? So if I heard you right, Guido, like if we feel forlorn, it's because we're kind of casting off one version of authority that's tied to an institution that looks a certain way. And in place of it, we have cells. And I think those cells with perishable currency, possibly, they could start creating spaces that yoke up with other spaces. And so that things like possibly, it sounds like I was just chilling at Woodstock, I'm sure, but possibly, those things, that they link up, and then the nation state, somehow dies from, like all parasites, once they, suck up all the life of the host, they too die.
I see I see
Don't
what you
take the
mean.
brown acid. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see.
So, hey, I don't know if you guys know this, but have you read The Road by Cormac McCarthy?
I have a couple times.
And that's, I think
they made a movie of that, right? With
they did
Viggo
make a
Mortensen.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that, I mean, that's pretty much a Gnostic, parable because
Explain, because I didn't
well,
understand.
because what is it's a post-apocalyptic world
Okay, I remember that. And
and
what?
cannibalism
Yes, I
runs
remember that.
rampant and people
Right.
are just evil. But this father is trying to guide his son through this world.
The wife leaves, right?
The wife leaves, yeah, because she can't handle it. She can't
She
handle
can.
the
Right.
the grotesqueness, which I can understand. And but the refrain that comes several times, we're the good guys, we're carrying the light, right, Dad? Right? And
Yeah.
that's well, and actually that also shows up in Terrence Malick's film The Thin Red Line, right? Where I've seen a different world, right? And he there's recognized that there's a spark inside of this one guy that still sees the good in the world. And they're in the middle of Guantanamo Bay, right? I mean, it's hell. They're living in hell. And though you're living in hell in both of those examples, Thin Red Line and The Road, and that's not everybody, but there are certain individuals who, for whatever reason, who are carrying the light or have the spark in them. That's idea comes from Burma and from Gnosticism. And they have the ability not to see the good in everybody, but to see the good when it appears. The good, the true, and the beautiful. I mean, when it appears. And but it doesn't change anything, like Guido was saying, right? It doesn't change anything, but you haven't capitulated to the monster. You haven't become a cannibal.
The story ends on a positive note that the dad dies, but he is rescued by another family of good
Yes.
guys.
Right.
All right. So it was
Yeah.
a 50. It was a stroke of luck in a way. But yeah, it could have been. It could have been a family of raiders, a gang of raiders. But
Mhm.
yeah, no, you're advocating. You're advocating a rebirth, a Gnostic rebirth of creed with a leadership, with a anarchistic leadership of stoic people. And
You
I like
got like
that.
a computer program. You pump in this stuff, it gives you kind of the
I
religion you're dreaming of.
I like that. I am afraid that some of us, the weaker ones, wouldn't be able to survive. I see myself in that McCormick story. I see myself being eaten alive in the matter of the first 5 minutes of the movie.
I don't think so.
I would try
Well,
to defend, but the question is, why have some of us been left in this carnage? We should. I think we should. It's always a pleasure talking to you. We should redo once after you've seen the movie I mentioned. I think it's gonna. I hope
So
it's
I
gonna
look up Burmese heart. That's the
harp,
harp.
the harp,
harp. Okay. So
the
sorry.
musical instrument.
Yeah.
I got it written down.
And I wonder what is that going to make you feel and think.
This will be
You-
fun. Yeah.
But yeah, and he doesn't he tackles the issue of Theodicy. He dismisses it at the end. I don't want to spoil it to you, but it's not a movie that's going to tell you why there is evil, not at all. Which is what we're asking, what I'm asking. But the question for us is why should we put up with the kingdom of a king who's abdicated? Why should we still call him king? That's my question. If you've abdicated, you're no longer king. And so that makes us subjects of what? All the more so as we refuse the tenure of the one who's in charge, who's by his own admission wicked, smart and performant and clever and alluring and attractive, but still he is what he is. And what about the rest of us?
Yeah.
So that's why I think that fable of the apprentices is interesting, but
Mhm.
there's nothing heroic about
No.
being caught in this life and say, okay, I get it. I'm just going to navigate with enough craft and not craft, enough savvy, and most
Mhm.
important of all, I'm not going to
Mhm.
ask too many questions because my life depends on that. Which is pretty much the kind of advice that now certain, you know, avuncular characters give to the younger generation. We talked about this also months past of the young people having no hope, nothing to look
Mhm.
up to. And this is they pretty much will give you a grim type of advice. Don't
Mhm.
ask questions or else you're not going to get the job. You know, bend whenever you have to bend and so on. It's an ethos of shit. And I've always refused it, but because I could afford to refuse it, because I was privileged. But if you're not privileged, you're going to have to eat shit, and then you're back to square one. Again, why should we live under what should we call king? A king who's abdicated.
Well, that's it. That's the thing. I mean, it's, we're conditioned to think in hierarchical terms, whether it's
Yes.
religious or secular,
I
and
think this is a big
and
part.
how to think about the relationship to God, if you want to use the word, in a way that does not think hierarchically. And I'm not saying it's, I don't want to even put a definition to it, but that's certainly, I mean, that's why, I always tell people I hate to give sociology a definition because it kills it. But when you think about that relationship in those terms, it the hierarchical aspect of it poisons everything. And then when people say, well, families are hierarchical, well, I don't know.
I think there's something going on
I
with them
think
in our
they're
time.
movable.
Yeah, I
They're more
agree.
plastic than that, right?
I think a
But
seminal. Go ahead. Yeah.
universities and seminaries are hierarchical, right? The church is hierarchical.
Mhm.
And I don't care which church you go to. It's not the Catholic Church. It's the Protestants that they might say they don't have a pope, but they're still hierarchical. I'm sorry, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, and I think there is a way to um not be so conceptual when it comes to doing this. And not, I was gonna almost said thinking of this because thinking is the wrong word. But there's a poisonousness that comes with the conceptualness um, that already destroys it before it's been born. So I mean, how do you
Conceptualness
learn to?
regarding the thing that comes next. Is that right,
Yeah. So
Michael?
how do you? I
Yeah,
mean,
right, right.
you have to learn how to live. In what Keats called negative capability, right? You have to learn how to live there and be okay with that.
Give a
Because
definition of Kate's.
part of the I think the attraction for hierarchy is I need somebody with the answers, right? I need a father figure. Somebody call Freud. Yeah, right? I need my daddy to tell me what to do.
Yeah,
What's that? Can
yeah.
you give it a quick definition, Mike, of a negative capability?
He actually Keats uses it when he's talking about Shakespeare. He says it's the ability to live with complexities, to
Mhm.
not have to sew everything up,
Like a
to
multiverse as
not have
opposed
to
to a
have a moral of
universe.
the
Yeah.
story, and to
Yep.
not
Yep. Yep.
have an easy explanation
Mhm.
or even a definitive explanation.
Interesting.
So you live kind of in the between.
Holy Saturday, some people, like our good priests, they'll say, Mexican. It's funny that you mentioned that, Guido. Mexican, they're very comfortable saying, yeah, we're living Holy Saturday. We won't see what's going to be born. Wasn't our good fortune. So let's do the work. Let's do the work. Pretty cool when you see it because there's a lot of peace that goes with it, at least amongst these guys. But
Mhm.
Guido?
Yeah. I know it's I understand all of this is who knows? Who knows? It's true. When we will have escaped, if we can escape this cage, we will know more about ourselves, I think. we will find out that we're not, when they say that human nature is horrible, being what it is, it's mostly because we've only seen it inside the cage. And they've done experiments with
I
animals.
agree. I agree.
They've done experiments with animals, I guess with monkeys, and they did things in such a way that after a while, they saw that they would just assume really abominable behaviors. They would prostitute the females for an extra piece of food and things of that sort. So things that, and maybe so can we escape? Can we escape the beehive? And maybe it's like in the story of the cavern. We'll come into, but the story of the cavern doesn't end well, right? He comes in, he sees the light, and then he gets he wants to free the others and gets killed. What is that? The story of how it ends with Plato? But um,
Well, there's a threat of him being killed. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
so maybe it's a challenge for us. But regardless, whether we succeed or not, what is important in that story you'll see in the Burmese harp is that for all this pain that there has been, all this needless, senseless suffering that there has been, and for those who have been mown down by war, who could have lived a life and didn't, and all these interruptions that have no meaning, some kind of price has to be paid. Some kind of things has to be given. I don't know if it's to redress it or to acknowledge it or to give it its due. I don't know what that means, but that's something the movie intimates. And I think it's something for us, and I don't think Christianity tells us anything about that. It tells us about alleviating pain and soothing those who suffer, but it doesn't really go into the depths of why it has to be and what is, you know, emotionally speaking, the price of all this suffering that just goes. And it's an important thing because for us, we say, well, what is done, the dead are dead, and we move forward. And you'll see this in the movie, there's going to be that too, but there's going to be, one who is not going to do that. And the movie revolves around that. And which makes you want to ask, what is the spiritual economics of the world we live in? This give and take. Where are you in this world? Where do you belong? What has it all meant? And but back to the fundamental question, and why was there any need to set this whole circus in motion? And what a circus it is. And why do we have to wait for an epiphany through the veil to breathe again and to yearn again? Why do we have to go through that? And the price for going through that is this this payload of suffering, which is this container of toxic waste that has just been blown into space or just buried in the sands of Africa, as we do nowadays with waste. But then what is the price that has to be paid for this, spiritually or cosmically speaking, on the one hand? And that's the big question. And on the other hand is again, um, you know, the question we ask ourselves every day, and what am I supposed to do in all of this? And why am I so keen also on being afraid of not leaving any trace? And why do I want to leave a trace? Why am I afraid of just disappearing? Because that seems what we're destined to be in this beehive, that we will have left this life without, not knowing what it has meant and what our purpose was for the vast majority of us. Now, especially that it's so regimented. And so, I don't know. I think that, these questions are so basic, as we know, but it's like we don't ask them. We don't ask them enough. And nor do we direct our efforts in trying to find a beginning of a discourse addressing them. Nobody does that anymore. When institutional Catholics speak, and you know this much better than I do because and you talk to people, as you're saying, you're having this podcast and you invite theologians. I mean, what the hell do they talk about, really? That's so important. What difference does it make? I'm asking you. What have you learned from all these podcasts from, militant Catholics? What are they doing to this world? I mean, you say, well, they're alleviating pain. Well, that's great. Is that it? Which will be enough. Then I say, okay, that's great. but that isn't peculiar to Catholicism. There's a lot of
No.
people, who have no idea who Christ is that do just that. So again, it resets the discussion as okay.
Yeah.
But aside from that, what is, to your experience also as through the podcast and anthropologically and culturally, what have you learned? What have you seen from this
Well, for
guy?
me, I'll tell you, it's not about finding any answers, but for me, it's I guess pleasure might be the right word, but it's an honor to see people trying to understand. You know what I mean?
Okay, but that's
You
something.
know, yeah. I actually, when I used to hang out with the Hare Krishnas way back in the day, they said so. This is in Detroit. There's a big Hare Krishna community, and when I was a teacher, actually, a lot of the kids at the school were Hare Krishna kids. And one of the things this one of the Krishnas told me, which has stuck with me for 40 years probably, he said, one of the ways of showing love is to reveal your mind to another person. So I kind of inhabit that. I don't need answers necessarily, but I'm honored to have, like right now with you, right? To have another person reveal his mind to you in an unprotected way. I mean, that's a
Okay.
form of love as far as I'm concerned, and I can live with that. And that's, in a way, for me, that's negative capability too, because
Yeah.
I don't need to understand it. You
If
know,
I asked my son,
hear
like,
it.
if like, how would you describe this podcast? Like, is it a niche in this area? Because I don't know the world of podcasting at all. But he would say things like, this many followers or this many views, you're in the top. It doesn't mean we're big. We're always going to be niche, and we don't give a shit. Point being, he would say, oh, even this many viewers puts you in the top 5% of all podcasts or something. And then there's the elite 1% that everybody sees. Point being, Michael got to it. That would be, I said, what do you think of the podcast, Aiden? He goes, it's just pretty intelligent guys, well-meaning, funny, who are trying to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it.
No,
And I
no,
didn't
no.
mean that to sound edgy. Yeah.
No, no. I meant to say, but do they, these militant Catholics that you've been dealing with for a long time, do you think that they're moving in some particular way or
I don't know if
meaningful
we've
way?
had that many. Michael, you answer that
Yeah, I
question.
don't think we've had that many.
I can't think of any of our guests that would fit that. I think a lot of our guests might define themselves as being
A few,
against that. Yeah.
yeah, a few,
Yeah, it seems it's
but the other
yeah.
thing is, I mean, and this is the problem with academics, right? Is they're all talking, no action. And I'm not saying this about the people we've had in the show, but people who live in the realms of ideas generally don't have a lot, like you were saying at the beginning of the podcast, they don't have a lot of, okay, so what do I do? So it's nice proposal of ideas.
Well, yeah, of course,
Um,
academics they're a privileged bunch. They're fed. They don't have to think of doing anything.
yeah.
Well, how about this? We leave it there.
And we have homework.
And we have homework. Excellent. Well said. That was good. So Burmese harp, listeners of the Regeneration podcast. And we'll all kind of say here that we will rejoin on the subject of Theodicy, what we can learn from Burmese harp. And that will be probably not within 3 weeks, but sometime between 3 weeks and 6 weeks. Listeners, Guido, anything like you would like to say to our listeners by way of getting your name and material out there?
Yes, well,
Good.
yes, my website is still not up, unfortunately, but my books are there, and yeah, there's political
That's
script of
great.
Jesus.
Only Guido. If only you could get them. My books are there on the website that you can't access.
No, 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 they're on Amazon.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, political scripting of Jesus, is lots there to spark, I think, interesting discussions, and the book on the church, Empire and Church, could be of interest, and yeah,
Absolutely.
All
Important.
of them, really all of them. Yep.
and
So,
thank you
yeah.
for having me.
Absolutely. And thanks everybody for listening to the Regeneration podcast. We will see you when we see you.